The city never slowed down for anyone, especially not on a cold evening when the wind rushed between the skyscrapers like it had somewhere important to be. People in tailored coats and polished shoes moved quickly across the pavement, eyes locked on glowing phone screens or ticking watches, chasing meetings, profits, deadlines. Among them walked Adrian Cole, a self-made millionaire CEO whose name was whispered in boardrooms and printed in financial magazines as a symbol of discipline and success. His company had just closed a deal worth hundreds of millions, and yet as he stepped out of his sleek black car, the applause from earlier that day still ringing faintly in his ears, he felt nothing but a strange, hollow silence inside his chest. He had built an empire from nothing, fought through rejection, poverty, and sleepless nights to become one of the most respected executives in the city. But success had come with a cost he rarely allowed himself to examine. As he adjusted his cufflinks and prepared to enter another high-profile dinner meeting, a fragile sound cut through the noise of honking taxis and hurried footsteps, a violin, soft but precise, trembling slightly in the cold air. At first, he almost ignored it. Street musicians were common in this part of town, and he had long trained himself to filter out distractions. But there was something different about this sound. It wasn't loud or flashy, it was careful, emotional, almost pleading. He turned his head and saw her. A small girl, no older than 7 or 8, stood near the entrance of a subway station. Her red coat was slightly oversized, sleeves covering part of her tiny hands as she held the violin and bowed with surprising steadiness. A simple cardboard sign rested at her feet, "Play a song, $1." There was no dramatic performance, no exaggerated gestures to grab attention. Just focus. Just music. Just hope. People walked past her without slowing down. Some glanced briefly, others didn't even notice. A few coins lay in the open violin case, but not many. Adrian watched as she finished one piece and lowered the bow for a moment, taking a small breath before beginning again, as if she understood that stopping meant disappearing entirely. He didn't know why his feet moved toward her. Perhaps it was curiosity. Perhaps it was guilt. Or perhaps it was the memory he had buried for decades, now stirring unexpectedly. He stopped in front of her. She noticed the expensive shoes first, then slowly lifted her eyes. They were bright, determined, but carrying a depth no child should have. "Would you like a song, sir?" she asked politely, her voice steady but soft. Adrian reached into his wallet, where crisp bills sat neatly arranged, symbols of deals and dominance. He pulled out a $1 bill. For the first time in years, that denomination felt foreign in his hand. He handed it to her without speaking. She smiled, an honest, grateful smile, and carefully placed the dollar into her case as if it were worth a fortune. Then she lifted the violin once more. What happened next shattered something inside him. The melody she chose wasn't random. It was an old classical piece, one his mother used to play in their tiny apartment when he was a boy. Back when the walls were thin, the heater barely worked, and dreams felt too big for the space they lived in. His mother had owned a worn violin, her most precious possession. She would play in the evenings after long shifts, her music filling their cramped home with warmth and possibility. She used to tell him, "Adrian, success means nothing if you forget how to feel." But as the years passed and ambition consumed him, he had forgotten. He had forgotten the smell of that apartment, the way his mother closed her eyes when she played, the way she smiled at him after every song as if he were her greatest audience. He had forgotten her sacrifice, her softness. And now, standing on a crowded sidewalk as this little girl played the same melody with breathtaking sincerity, he remembered everything. The notes were not technically perfect, but they were alive. Each vibration of the string carried determination. She wasn't playing for attention. She was playing because she needed to. Because a dollar mattered. Because every passerby was a possibility. Adrian felt his throat tighten. The world around him blurred. The honking cars faded. The business dinner waiting for him became irrelevant. All he could see was this child pouring her heart into an instrument almost as big as she was. By the time she reached the final note, his eyes were wet. He hadn't cried in over 20 years. Not when competitors betrayed him. Not when deals collapsed. Not even at his mother's funeral, when he stood composed and unbreakable before a crowd of mourners. But here, on this sidewalk, a 7-year-old girl had broken through the armor he had spent decades building. She lowered the violin and looked at him, concerned. "Was it okay, sir?" she asked, unsure whether his silence meant disappointment. Adrian swallowed hard. It was more than okay, he managed to say. Where did you learn to play like that? She hesitated before answering. My mom teaches me. She says if I practice every day, maybe one day I can play on a big stage. We're saving for a better violin. Adrian glanced at the worn instrument in her hands. The varnish was chipped. One string looked recently replaced with a cheaper alternative. And why are you playing here? He asked gently. She looked down for a moment. My mom's been sick. We need a little extra money. She said it without self-pity. Just truth. That was the moment something shifted permanently inside him. He reached back into his wallet, but this time he didn't pull out $1. He pulled out a thick stack of bills, more money than she had likely seen at once in her life. He placed it carefully into her violin case. Her eyes widened in disbelief. Sir, that's too much, she whispered. Adrian shook his head. No, he said softly, his voice breaking. It's not enough. People nearby had begun to notice. Some slowed down. Others stopped entirely. But Adrian didn't care about the audience. For the first time in years, he wasn't acting as the CEO. He was acting as the son who remembered what sacrifice looked like. He knelt down to her level. Promise me something, he said. Promise me you'll keep playing. Not for the money. Not for the crowd. But because it makes you feel something. She nodded eagerly, still stunned. Yes, sir. He smiled through tears. Good. Because the world needs that. He asked for her mother's contact information and quietly arranged for medical assistance, music lessons with a professional instructor, and a brand new violin delivered within the week. He didn't announce it to the press. He didn't post about it online. This wasn't charity for headlines. It was redemption. As Adrian walked away from the subway entrance, he canceled his dinner meeting. Instead, he went home and opened the old storage box he hadn't touched in years. Inside lay his mother's violin, fragile but intact. He held it gently, letting the memories flood back without resistance. That night, for the first time in decades, he allowed himself to feel proud not of his wealth, but of his humanity. The next morning, he established a foundation dedicated to supporting young street musicians and children from struggling families who carried extraordinary talent. He named it after his mother. And every time he heard a violin on a busy street afterward, he stopped. Sometimes life-changing moments don't happen in boardrooms or under flashing cameras. Sometimes they happen when a millionaire pays $1 for a song and receives something priceless in return, a reminder of who he used to be, and who he still could become. If this story touched your heart even a little, if you believe kindness can transform not just lives but souls, then make sure you subscribe to this channel and join a community that celebrates hope, compassion, and the power of small moments. Because the next story might remind you of something you've forgotten too.